It started before she said a single word. A quiet black woman dressed in simple clothes stood in the first class line at the airport. She wasn't talking, wasn't making a scene, just standing there holding her phone with a digital boarding pass glowing on the screen. But that didn't matter. The gate agent didn't even look at her ticket, didn't ask her name. Instead, they waved over two security officers like they were calling backup. "Ma'am, step aside," one said. No explanation, no questions, just a voice that sounded more like a warning than a request. She didn't argue, didn't panic, just stepped out of line. Calm on the outside, but with a kind of stillness that only comes from holding something deep inside. Around her, people watched, not with surprise, but like they expected it, like they agreed with it. To them, she didn't look like someone who belonged in seat 1A, not with her skin, not with that hoodie. Not without some loud excuse to justify her place, but what no one could see was what sat quietly inside her bag. A sealed envelope, thick, heavy, with a red wax stamp no one noticed. Not that they would have cared if they did. People thought they were watching someone out of place. They had no idea they were standing in front of someone holding the final signature to a decision bigger than the plane, the gate, or even the airline itself. And she didn't need to tell them that, because she didn't come here to explain. She came here to watch. To see what people did when they thought no one important was looking. They thought they pulled the wrong passenger from the line. What they didn't know was they had just pulled the person who held the power to pull the plug on $4 billion in funding. She didn't buy a first-class seat. She bought something else. Something they were about to learn the hard way. Her name was Autumn Riley, but no one at the airport knew that. And if they did, it wouldn't have meant anything to them. Not yet. She moved through the terminal like anyone else. Quiet, focused, invisible by design. A navy hoodie, old sneakers, hair pulled back, and one plain tote bag slung over her shoulder. No carry-on, no designer purse, no noise. She walked like someone used to being overlooked. She planned it that way. Even with TSA pre-check marked on her boarding pass, they pulled her aside. "Random screening," the agent mumbled. "Autumn." Didn't roll her eyes or argue. She just nodded and placed her bag on the table. Let them search, let them look. She knew what they wouldn't find. Who she really was and why she was there. Inside that tote was a sealed envelope. It looked simple, even boring. But inside was a legal document connected to one of the biggest airline deals in the country. A deal that couldn't move forward without her signature. Not the CEO's, not the board's, hers. 3 years earlier, she'd received a letter, unexpected, serious, written in careful legal language. A trust had been left in her name, tied to a holding company with deep roots in transportation. It came with a clause. Before the next phase of a multi-billion-dollar merger could go through, she had to personally verify the company's real-world experience. That meant flying a route like a regular passenger. No one could know who she was. No first-class treatment, no titles. Just a raw, everyday version of the airline. The law firm had been clear. Don't tell anyone. Don't announce yourself. Just go. See what they're like when they think you're no one. That's why she was here. Not for comfort, not for revenge, for confirmation. She wasn't dressed down because she didn't have better. She dressed this way on purpose to see what happened when Power didn't wear a name tag. So when the security agents searched her things, she didn't flinch. When they held up the envelope, she didn't panic. She said one thing, private. And when they nodded and handed it back, clearly thinking it didn't matter, she didn't correct them. Not yet, because her role wasn't to stop them. Her role was to remember, watch, take note. No one around her could have guessed that the quiet woman being treated like an extra passenger was the only person holding the key to $4 billion. Not even the airline itself knew her identity. The trust had been set up to keep her hidden. Even the executives signing the contracts only knew that a final verifier existed, but not who or when she would appear. She could have walked away at any point and shut down the deal with one message, but she didn't want that. She wanted the truth. She wanted to give them a chance to do better. Autumn. Riley wasn't interested in being seen. She was here to see who they really were when they thought no one important was watching. The plane hadn't even taken off, and Autumn could already feel it starting. It didn't come all at once. It never did. It came in quiet choices, soft but sharp, and always with a smile that didn't reach the eyes. She sat down in seat 2A, placed the envelope carefully into the seat pocket in front of her, and tucked her tote under the seat, Her body was still, but her mind was recording everything. The man in the next seat gave a polite nod and then disappeared behind his tablet. The flight attendants moved up and down the aisle, offering small towels to passengers. They handed one to the people in row 1. They skipped her row completely and gave the next set to row 3. Autumn didn't ask why. She just watched. Her hands stayed folded in her lap. Later, when the drink cart rolled out, the same pattern followed. A soft drink for the man beside her. Champagne for the woman in the next row. Then nothing. No offer. No eye contact. Just the quiet decision to move along. When Autumn finally spoke, her voice was clear and calm. "Can I have some water?" The younger attendant looked unsure and turned to the older one. Sloan, according to her name tag. Sloan smiled tightly and said, "Complimentary drinks aren't included in your class of ticket." Her tone was light, but the words cut deep. Autumn raised an eyebrow. "Even in first class?" Sloan paused, looked down at her manifest and mumbled, "I'll check with the cabin manager." Then she walked away. No one else had to ask twice. Somewhere behind her, a baby started to cry. The same attendants who couldn't serve Autumn quickly brought warm milk and a blanket for the mother. Autumn didn't want special treatment. She just noticed how much effort they gave when they wanted to. At one point, a man from row 5 walked up, leaned casually on her seat and asked Sloan loud enough for the nearby rows to hear, "She's in first?" He didn't even look at Autumn when he said it. Sloan chuckled under her breath and said, "She's on a list. Must be points or something." The man laughed and walked back like it was just a funny little mix-up. Overhead, bins slammed shut, louder than they needed. 2. The flight attendants looked past her like she was a misprint on their chart. And yet Autumn sat still. The envelope in front of her hadn't moved. It rested like a weight, a quiet reminder of why she was here. She didn't look like a problem. She didn't raise her voice, but somehow just being in that seat felt like a challenge to everyone around her. Autumn didn't need a confrontation. She wasn't waiting to explode, but every skipped offer, every whispered doubt, every sideways glance was being stored in her mind like data. She'd been here before, not on this flight, but in this pattern. Treated as less, expected to. Take it silently. What they didn't know was that silence could carry power too. Power they wouldn't see until it was too late. Halfway through the flight, the cabin manager stopped at her row. He was tall, clean-cut, and carried a tablet he barely looked up from. "Ma'am, we've had a seating issue reported from the ground," he said like it was no big deal. "Would? You mind if I rescan your boarding pass?" Autumn said nothing at first. Then, without changing her expression, she picked up her phone, unlocked it, and held the pass out for him to see. He stared a little longer than needed, nodded without a thank you, and said, "Strange. Must have been a syncing error. I'll make a note." No apology, no explanation, just a vague excuse for something that wasn't vague at all. Not long after, Sloan returned. Her smile looked like it had been glued on too fast. "We've had a small request," she said. "Would you mind moving to seat 17D? It's for weight balance." The sentence sounded like something she'd practiced in the mirror. Autumn looked at her, steady and sure. "Weight balance?" she asked softly. Sloan nodded, her eyes a little too bright. "Yes, ma'am. Just protocol. I'll stay where?" "I am," Autumn said. "That's it. No anger, no edge. Just a clear, grounded decision." Sloan didn't know what to do with that. Her face froze for half a second before she gave a fake smile and backed away. A few rows down, another attendant leaned toward her and whispered something into her ear. Sloan nodded and tapped her tablet, making a note. That's when it started. Quiet but exact. On that screen, they marked Autumn as uncooperative. They logged reluctance to follow seating instructions. They called it a potential behavioral concern. And just like that, the system shifted. Not because Autumn had done anything wrong, but because she didn't give in. She didn't follow along quietly. And for them, that was enough to start rewriting the story. Autumn sat still, her hands folded, her eyes on the window, but her mind was sharp. Every detail was locked in, not just the words, but the way they were said, the silence after, the eyes that avoided hers. She'd been tested before, but this wasn't a test of patience. This was a test of power. They thought they were keeping her in check, but all they were really doing was proving everything she needed to see. She didn't. Need to push back? Not yet. She didn't need to raise her voice. She only needed to keep sitting in that seat, exactly where she belonged. And as the flight moved on, she leaned back slightly and whispered to herself, almost like a reminder, not a warning. "They're not doing this to me. They're doing it to themselves." As the plane touched down and rode toward the gate, Autumn stayed still. While other passengers unbuckled early and reached for their bags, she didn't move. She knew something was coming. And she was right. The moment the cabin door opened, 2 airport security staff stepped on board. Not police, but close enough. They walked straight down the aisle, calm and quiet. "Ms. Riley," one of them said, stopping at her row, "we'd like you to step off with us for a quick screening. No handcuffs, no threats. Just the kind of careful language meant to sound harmless." But Autumn knew better. This wasn't random. It wasn't quick. It was planned. She followed them through the jet bridge and into a small side room off the main terminal. The walls were gray, the lighting too bright. A woman in a blazer sat behind a desk with a tablet and a badge clipped to her shirt. "This is just a courtesy review," she said without looking up. "We received a report about an in-flight behavior that caused concern. Nothing serious." Autumn sat down. Her face gave nothing away. "Concern," she repeated, calm. "Yes," the A woman nodded. "Your refusal to move seats was logged, as well as your tone when addressing crew." Autumn reached into her tote and placed the envelope on the table, still sealed in red wax. Then, just as calmly, she pulled out a black card and slid it beside the envelope. It looked plain, no logo, no photo, just a serial number printed in clean silver. "This badge is tied to fiduciary authority under Eastern Financial Holdings," she said. "And this envelope," she tapped it once, "controls $4 billion in pending equity." The room changed, not with sound. No one gasped. No one jumped. But with energy. The woman behind the desk froze. The security guards shifted their stance. One of them glanced at the card, then back at Autumn, trying to piece it together. "You're with Eastern?" the woman asked. Autumn didn't blink. "I'm the final verifier on a merger that your airline is days away from closing. My signature decides if it happens." There was no anger in her voice. No need to raise it. Her calm said more than yelling ever could. She didn't argue her way into being respected. She simply laid down the truth and let it sit there. That envelope wasn't just paperwork. It was a mirror. One they hadn't seen coming. And now, all the skipped drinks, the ignored service, the silent judgment wasn't just a mistake. It was a risk. A very expensive one. No one in that room looked at her the same after that. The corporate panic didn't come with sirens or shouting. It came with silence, followed by nervous glances and phones buzzing quietly under the table. Because now they knew the woman they tried to flag was the one who could flag them back, with far more reach and far more power. The moment Autumn dropped her ID in the sealed envelope on the desk, everything behind the scenes started moving. Fast! The woman who'd been questioning her typed something into the system, and that one entry set off a chain reaction. Within minutes, alerts were flashing through the airline's internal network. Compliance teams were pinged. Executives started calling each other. Some of them hadn't even known her name until right then. Now it was everywhere. Her passenger file, which had been marked with quiet warnings and low-priority flags, was being scrubbed clean in real time. The behavioral concern label vanished. The note about seat refusal disappeared. Someone in legal flagged it all as potential procedural risk, and that was enough to shift the tone from control to damage control. Everyone who had touched her record was suddenly trying to undo their steps before anyone important noticed. But it was already too late. Autumn walked through the terminal like nothing had happened. No drama, no rush. Her tote was back on her shoulder, the envelope still untouched. She moved quietly past people who now avoided her gaze. Most of them didn't recognize her. Yet. But a few did. A gate agent scrolling through a tablet caught sight of her name, froze mid-sentence, and then stumbled through his words. Ms. Riley, your lounge access has been updated. Right this way." His voice cracked slightly, like he didn't trust his own script anymore. The scanners that had blinked red earlier now turned green before she even reached them. No delays. No second. Looks, everything just opened. Automatic. Smooth. The system had caught up. Behind the walls, someone was on a call with legal. Someone else was rewriting a briefing note. And every screen that showed her name now carried a quiet warning. Don't touch. Don't block. Don't question. Autumn didn't smile. She didn't need to. The apology had already begun, not with words, but with behavior. The same system that tried to shut her out was now tripping over itself to let her in. Not because it cared, but because it realized who she was. She didn't push back. She just kept walking, calm, unbothered, and this time, no one dared stop her. Autumn didn't rush. She found a quiet seat in a private lounge, pulled out her secure device from the tote, and powered it on. No one noticed. No one disturbed her. As the screen lit up, she tapped into the internal audit system linked to her authority. Her fingerprint unlocked everything. She didn't need help. She knew exactly where to look. The dashboard opened, a clean interface built for trust officers. Like her. With a few commands, she pulled the footage. Camera angles from the gate, the jet bridge, the cabin, all of it stored, all of it time-stamped. She started lining up the moments in order, one by one. There was the gate agent ignoring her pass, waving her aside without scanning it, timestamp logged. Then the boarding camera, Autumn standing patiently as the attendant turned her away and waved others through. Another entry added, then came the cabin footage. The towel service passed by row 2, the drink cart that skipped her. The moment Sloan leaned over and whispered to another crew member right after glancing at Autumn. And then that passenger who stopped by her seat and said, "She's in first?" As if she wasn't sitting right there. Every clip clear. Every word audible. She pulled crew communications next. Messages sent from tablets, headset notes, internal comments. Sloan logging Autumn as non-compliant after she calmly said, "I'll stay where I am." Nothing in her tone sounded sharp, nothing even slightly aggressive, but there it was in writing. False protocol, recorded lies. Quiet exclusions dressed as policy. Autumn linked them together, one after the other. She marked each one and built a live feed timeline. A story told not by emotions or opinions, but by facts, by their own system. The same one they thought would protect them. She adjusted the screen brightness, leaned back, and stared at the footage playing silently. The cart moving past her. The moment the man laughed and called her a points upgrade. The cold plate of fish dropped in front of her without a word. Then she whispered to herself. Not out of anger, but like someone clicking the last piece of a puzzle into place. "Now play it back." And the system did, frame by frame, without excuse. Inside a windowless conference room at the airline's headquarters, a group of people sat around a long table. The mood was tense. Phones had been silenced. Nobody made small talk. HR reps, legal advisors, compliance officers, and a manager from the operations team were all there. Everyone knew something had gone wrong, but not everyone knew how badly. Then the first video clip played. The screen showed the gate, Trent, the agent, holding Autumn's boarding pass, glancing at her, then handing it back without scanning. Next came the cabin footage. Sloan walking down the aisle, handing out towels to row 1, skipping row 2, then handing more out to row 3 like it was routine. Another clip showed the drink cart stopping beside Autumn's seat, then moving. On without a word. One more played, the man who leaned over her seat and joked about her being a points passenger. Sloan's smile followed right after. Each clip had timestamps. Each one was synced to crew logs and communication records. And in between the clips, screenshots popped up. Notes typed into the system, labeling Autumn as reluctant, non-compliant, and possibly escalated. None of those labels matched what they were watching on screen. The HR director paused the video and looked up. "You didn't need to know who she was," she said quietly. "That was the test, and you failed." Sloan sat still, hands clenched. In her lap, Trent leaned back in his chair, jaw tight. They didn't speak. There wasn't much they could say. The facts were on the screen. The choices they made, the way they dismissed her, judged her, ignored her, weren't accidents. They were habits, unchecked ones. The director continued. This wasn't a guest complaint. This wasn't a training issue. This was an internal audit by a stakeholder with signing authority over the largest financial decision we faced in years. There it was. The realization dropped heavy in the room. The woman they flagged, skipped, and quietly mocked was the key figure holding the power to approve or freeze the airline's entire merger deal. She wasn't just important. She was the person they should have protected the most. Trent was suspended. On the spot, pending investigation. Sloan was removed from active flight status. The rest of the crew on Flight 447 were told to stay off schedule until further notice. Nobody argued. Nobody pushed back, because the footage didn't lie. and the system they thought was built to cover them had been watching from the inside. What had started as a simple misunderstanding had turned into a full-scale internal failure, one that now reached all the way to the top. Sloan walked through the terminal with her shoulders tight and her uniform still neat, but the energy around her had changed. She wasn't heading to an international flight now. She wasn't even near the premium gates. Her name had been removed from the long-haul rotation that morning. She was being reassigned to a short domestic run. Small plane, no first class. She didn't expect to see Autumn again, but life has a way of circling back when it wants to teach you something. They crossed paths near a quiet corner by the executive. Services desk. Autumn was finishing a short call, holding her secure case in one hand, her tote still over her shoulder. She didn't look tired or angry, just focused. At first, she didn't even notice Sloan, but Sloan saw her right away and slowed her steps. For a second, neither of them spoke. The silence sat heavy between them. Autumn turned, met Sloan's eyes, and stepped forward. Not fast, not harsh, just enough to close the space. Her voice was steady, clear. No edge, no pause. "You said I didn't belong in first class," she said. "You were right." Sloan blinked, unsure if she was hearing a thank you or a dig. But Autumn finished before she could respond. "I came to buy it." That was it. Nothing more. No raised voice, no public moment. Just a sentence that landed like a quiet truth in the middle of everything Sloan thought she understood. Sloan didn't reply. She couldn't. The words stuck heavier than a speech ever would have. Because now she knew exactly who Autumn was. And exactly what she'd lost by treating her like she didn't matter. Autumn didn't wait for a reaction. She turned and walked toward the private exit, the one that didn't require boarding passes or priority scans. This time, she didn't have to prove anything. The boardroom was silent when Autumn walked in. No one stood to greet her. A few glanced up from their papers, unsure what to say. The air was thick with tension, like everyone knew they'd been caught, but no one wanted to be the first to admit it. She didn't wait for an introduction. She placed the audit report on the center of the table and opened it slowly. Page after page showed exactly what happened. Timestamps, crew logs, video stills, internal messages, not opinions, proof. No one spoke as she flipped through the pages. They all knew every small choice, every skipped service, every silent dismissal. It was all there, stacked in black and white. Then she looked up. "You built a system that doesn't punish people for being loud," she said. "It punishes people for not yielding." The CEO cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. "Ms. Riley, let me just say if we had known who you were," but she cut him off before he could finish. "That's the problem," she said. "You would have treated me differently if you knew. But I wasn't here to be treated differently. I was here to see how your system works when it thinks no one's watching. What you gave me wasn't a mistake. It was a mirror." Silence again. No one argued. No one could. Autumn reached into her bag and pulled out one final document. A conditional signature form. It held the final approval needed for the merger. Without it, the deal would stall. Stocks would dip. Investors would back off. She placed it gently on the table. "You'll meet compliance," she said, "or you'll meet collapse." And just like that, the balance of power in the room shifted. Not through shouting, not through threats, but through the kind of truth that can't be denied once it's spoken out loud. The fallout didn't come with a press release. No public apology, no bold statement. Just an internal memo sent through the airline system, tucked between regular updates. The subject line was dry. Crew realignment, immediate shift. But the names listed underneath said everything. Everyone from Flight 447 was reassigned. Sloan, Trent, and the others were moved to low-tier domestic routes. No more long-haul flights, no more international service, no more first class. First. Their new schedules included tight turnarounds, crowded cabins, and no lounge access. The airline didn't call it a punishment, they called it operational restructuring, but everyone on the inside knew better. Meanwhile, Autumn's name quietly appeared in the compliance database. No photos, no spotlight, just one simple line noting her as a stakeholder with discretionary control and merger oversight. Her presence was now on record. No more hidden status, no more anonymity. She didn't need to be loud about it. She just had to exist inside their system with the weight her name carried. Later that week, she walked through another terminal. Different city, different airport. The same silence followed her. But this time, it wasn't made of doubt. It was made of recognition. She passed a sign that read, "First class, priority only." The scanner ahead of her turned green before she even got close. No one questioned her. No one pulled her aside. She didn't smile. She didn't pause. Because for her, that small moment, walking through without being stopped, meant more than anything written in a memo. It was quiet proof that something had shifted. Not just for her, but for the system that had finally seen itself, even if it didn't like what it saw. Autumn sat alone in a quiet corner of the executive lounge. No one bothered her. The room was clean, still, and calm, the kind of calm that comes after something big has already happened. She reached into her toe and pulled out the secure device one last time. The screen lit up with a soft green glow. Her thumb hovered over the final button. She pressed it just once. No noise, no alert, just a soft confirmation on the screen. The transaction was live. The merger would go through, but not under the old terms. New conditions had been added. Quite changes that would affect everything from how passengers were flagged to how internal staff were trained and held accountable. No one outside the system would know why those changes existed, but inside they'd never forget. Because the person they thought didn't belong turned out to be the one writing the rules. She leaned back, watching the city move beyond the tall windows. Flights took off in the distance. People rushed between gates, unaware of what had unfolded just a few hours ago. And maybe that was the point. In her mind, a quiet thought settled, something steady and real. Justice doesn't always raise its voice. Sometimes it just rewrites the terms. The screen faded to black, and a single line of text appeared. The merger passed, but not without new conditions, all because one woman refused to be erased.